Good afternoon. My name is Howard Billings, and I'm president of the Criminal Police here in Fulton County. Literally speaking, we have two Fulton counties. You have the Justice Centers, and you have the across the street, largely divide. As new judges, how will you work with the county commissioners to keep your programs in effect, such as the Veteran Court and the Drug Court? How will you effectively work with the county commissioner? Make sure that money stays in your budget, that we continue to carry these programs out.
Is that posed to every candidate?
That posed to anyone who wants.
Anyone wants to ask?
I'd like to take the first stab at it. I think that judges should integrate their decision-making with existing resources to the extent that there are community-based resources that help us to divert folks from incarceration, or even county-based resources, county department of mental health, other departments within the county. We should have a holistic approach to justice in Fulton County to make sure that we close that divide between the two Fulton counties.
I believe that it's a matter of education and compassion between people. You have to have relationships with Commissioner Arrington. You have to have relationships with the people who hold the purse strings and make them aware of what the needs of the court are. The court has mandated duties. The court has discretionary duties. Accountability courts are not quite mandated yet. They are still discretionary. That's the easiest place to cut. You need to make the commissioners aware of that that's the best area that we could spend our money, and I need your help in getting those courts in place.
I would like to add, as Chief Judge of the Fulton County Juvenile Court, I had to cut a budget of $700,000. So we've had to make decisions about, do you eliminate programs that are effective, or do you eliminate personnel? So you inform the commissioners, you advocate, but you have to get the public on your side. So you have to have people come into the court, come into the commissioners' meeting saying, we want these programs to remain. They are effective, they do great good in the community, and we support you continually to fund these programs.
Hi, I'm Adrian Froller. I'm president of this little neighborhood that you're in right now, Capitol View Manor.
This is a big neighborhood.
It's a beautiful neighborhood. It's a beautiful neighborhood. So I asked a friend of mine who's an attorney to give me a couple of good questions. So there's two questions, and the first one is very, very short. Mandatory minimums, do you support them? If so, for what crimes? And what about, and then the second question is, what about repeat offenders for quality of life or low-level crimes? So let's say someone's arrested 56 times for shoplifting. Do they get put in jail?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. First, as it relates to mandatory minimums, it would be improper for us to comment on what our position is as a judicial candidate. We have to essentially follow the law. I think there was a lot of controversy that was in the paper between a fight between D.A. Howard and Judge Shue because of a judge speaking about mandatory minimums. I will say this, however. I do believe that as a prosecutor for 12 plus years and current judges who sit on the bench, the reality is that everybody can kind of get who's the bad guy that needs to be put away for a long time and who needs to be cut a break. And so to that end, I think that judges should have more discretion. As it relates to the shoplifter, the reality is, in my opinion, is that there should be programs in place specifically to deal with that person, particularly in light of the fact that he or she is a non-violent offender. Locking a person up because they've been arrested 56 times, in my opinion, comes to the point where a judge has to exercise discretion and real common sense as to whether or not that person is a real danger to the community. Dealing with the problem, addressing the problem, providing the necessary resources is important in that particular situation.
All right, guys, I'm going to ask you to keep your remarks to 30 seconds because a lot of people still want to meet you after, and we want to be respectful of the time.
You know, the courts are supposed to be the epitome of justice, fairness, and impartiality. But I heard from the moderator, and I found it shocking when he said that historically there's been a gaming of the system, and I'm paraphrasing here, where you would have judges prematurely retire so that the governor can then appoint, when you cut to the quick, the old voice network. So that creates a lack of faith and confidence in people like me, quite frankly. I am generally jaded by prosecutors. I can hear nothing that you guys said today that I find objectionable, but it's not the way that the courts actually work. And I've been in courts throughout this country. So when people tell me, if a police officer says he wasn't wearing his seatbelt, and the guy says he was wearing his seatbelt, I haven't found a court in this nation that says it's a tie. The police officer is given a strong presumption of correctness. So even amongst the judge candidates, I see a degree of politics. But my question is this: the demographics of Fulton County should be reflective of the demographics of the judgeship. And if you can share with me, because we can say in the real world it's neither black or white, but in Fulton County it has been nothing but black or white, and that has a tremendous negative impact on people like me that may come before a court.
All right, well, we know what that was aimed at, so you guys want to take a
I'd
stab
like
at it?
to respond to this, sir. Two things. Recently, we have in the state a judicial qualification committee, and the chairperson just quit. It made the front page of the AJC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, not long ago. And he cited as his major reason politics, how favoritism from the legislative branch, including the judicial branch, takes place. That's historical in this country, and we all know. Now, my position is I would like to see that the public trust is restored at least to the bench. And that's only going to be done if we engage the community.
Thank you. Okay, anyone can answer this question. All right, that's it. Dr. Cobble?
My question is directed to anyone who can answer. Right. Can you hear me? I thought my voice. Oh, no, I see you on the recording. I'm the Reverend Dr. Richard Cobble. I've been living in Atlanta 36 years. I want to know what creativity do you bring to connect the bench with our community? That is, I can remember Judge Leah Sears back in the early 90s when Fulton County had a very serious, as we still do today, drug trafficking and usage problem. But she was able, because she was a member at Ebenezer where I was ordained, was able to gather together a group of jurists and took them to Miami, where they was able to organize and strategize and formulate the drug code. That was the result of the creativity learning that there was a serious problem in Fulton County in the early 90s. Now, any one of you can answer. What serious creativity solutions as a judge that you can bring to the bench that connect the law and our community so that we can become a better community? What do you bring, like Judge Leah Sears, who helped to formulate the drug court, to Fulton County?
I'd like to take that. I think we should stay engaged in the community. I think all too often the perception of the bench is true. We have judges who are disconnected and who are on a power-hungry strike against our community in most instances. The judges that are truly engaged in creative decision-making are those who are engaged in the community. That's the bottom line.
If I can take a stab at it. One of the things that I would do my first year, if fortunate to be elected, is create an accountability court for parents who have kids that are charged with crimes. Because the reality is that the court can only do so much in many instances. And when they go back to the same environment in which they're in, oftentimes they are going back to parents who have failed parenting skills. And so having parents come before the courts, it will engage the court with the community and put a stop and an end, in my opinion, to the real recidivism that's going on. But that is one of the creative things that I would do.
I think we need to learn from other cultures. The United States is one, if not the highest country in the world. I think it's second to a small island on this mass incarceration. Now, how is it that the rest of the world can answer this gentleman's question, the Reverend's question, but we can't? So one thing I would like to do is to answer that question, is to get the judges involved in world civilizations, visit other cultures, study from them, and implement it.
Commissioner?
My question is about, and I guess I don't know maybe if you guys can answer this or not. My question is about the recent Supreme Court decision that took away judicial discretion for pleas, and I'd like to hear in particular from prosecutors or judges, their opinion on that, and I guess if you can't necessarily talk about that as a judicial candidate, then perhaps we can talk about the removal of the JQC. I mean, the president may have resigned, but the legislature just passed a law that's going to abolish the entire JQC altogether, and is going to put in a new system. So I'd like to hear about the removal of judicial discretion from pleas. Typically, and for those that don't know, what typically happens if there's a plea and the defense and the prosecutor don't agree, the judge can make a ruling. The Supreme Court just issued a decision basically saying that the judge doesn't, if the prosecution doesn't agree, then the judge cannot go forward with the plea. So the prosecutor has to agree with the plea based on this recent Supreme Court ruling.
I'll take a stab at that. My understanding of the ruling, that's not quite exactly what the ruling was. My understanding, and what you're talking about, is the fact that what the Supreme Court put a stop to is judges undercutting the district attorney's office in these pleas. It used to be, and traditionally, it's always been that during a negotiated plea, the judge decides whether to accept it or not. And the defendant it's always been couched in terms of the defendant's rights. If the judge doesn't follow the plea recommendation, the defendant has always had the right to withdraw the guilty plea. But the judge has always had the right to come in with a sentence below what the DA had recommended, even on a negotiated plea. And what the court did was to say, okay, if the plea is negotiated and the district attorney has agreed to this, the defense attorney now cannot ask to undercut a negotiated plea unless the state agrees. Now, in a non-negotiated plea, the judge has broad discretion. So the court didn't put a stop to the non-negotiated pleas. They just gave the district attorney's office the right not to have their plea recommendation undercut when that was what the plea agreement was.
The problem in Fulton County is that the problem we have in Fulton County is the DAs don't have the discretion that they used to have. They basically have to do whatever they're told. There's a certain minimum, they have to follow that. So traditionally you would be right, because each individual prosecutor would have had an opportunity to exercise their own discretion, but under the current system, that discretion has been taken away from those individual prosecutors.
That's a totally. I agree with your assessment of the situation, but that's a separate problem. I mean, I know it's all related, but we as judges, we don't control the recommendations that the district attorney makes. I mean, to the extent that we can exert influence by repeatedly refusing to take those pleas. But what you're going to end up with, if everybody sticks to their guns, you're going to end up with a lot more trials and a lot less negotiated pleas. If the prosecutors in Fulton County, certainly they're not all this way, but you're right, they're not given the discretion to handle the cases the way they may want to. And that's a problem within the district attorney's office that needs to be addressed.
I think what the case was,
What I was going to say is, having sat as the judge on the Fulton County Juvenile Court bench, you have this problem all the time. The issue is the state comes in, they've negotiated a plea, and the judge has to be the person who agrees to that plea. The defendant says, I will plead to robbery. The state says we want to recommend a sentence of 5 years with 3 to serve, 2 on probation. Now, if the judge says, I will not go along with that plea, the defendant used to have, and still does have the opportunity to withdraw their plea. But now, based on the Supreme Court case, the state has the opportunity to withdraw the plea as well. So now, everybody's going to go to trial unless the state and the defendant can come up with a reasonable plea deal that's acceptable to the judge. Because I, as the judge, will say, I'm not accepting it, we go into trial.
You want to say something?
Well, I think what the case will do, it will force more non-negotiated pleas. Because at some point, a defendant will come before a court and still want the opportunity to argue for something less. The reality is that what the case does is that if there is a negotiated plea between the parties, that is, the state has made a recommendation for 5 years to serve, and the defendant comes before the court and says, hey, I'm guilty, I will accept that plea recommendation because I'm facing 20 years. I like your recommendation of 5. So it protects really both parties, the settlement negotiations. But I do think that the case will ultimately force more non-negotiated pleas if, in fact, a defendant wants to do something less than what the state recommends.
And so is it your understanding that that case doesn't affect non-negotiated pleas? Or it affects negotiated pleas and non-negotiated?
My understanding of the case law is that it affects only negotiated pleas and that it will not affect non-negotiated pleas because the agreement that the parties reached is one that the court wants to honor. And that is on both sides. The state should be able to get the benefit of its honor. The defendant who has agreed to that sentence should get the benefit of his or her honor. So for example, I think there would be a problem, for example, if the court tried to impose a greater sentence than what the parties agreed. The defendant could then come in, I believe, and say, wait a minute, that's not what I agreed to. I want to withdraw my plea. And so I think that it would protect defendants in many respects as well as the state.
That's a great question.
Hi, I'm Shannon Reeves with Atlanta Jobs of Justice. I come with 2 things. One, I want to invite all of the candidates out to May Day. On May 1st, we will be at the MLK Historic Site for International Workers' Day. It's an opportunity for you to fellowship with other constituents, to make sure that folks are meeting you. You only have the opportunity to say your name and what you are running for. 450 Auburn Ave, again, that's MLK Historic Site right next to Ebenezer Baptist Church. And again, come out for that so that you can talk to more constituents. My second point of interest is that I'm an ally with the Black Lives Matter Atlanta Coalition. We are curious which candidates would be interested in sitting down with Black Lives Matter and discussing what type of reforms, what type of positions that you would actually be able to take on the bench. And we would be happy to have that conversation. So if you're interested in talking to BLM, please give it. We can answer that on the mic. Will you meet with Black Lives Matter?
I'm open to meet with anybody in Fulton County that will talk to.
Absolutely.
I'm open. He grabbed the mic first. So.
Yes.
Me too.
From Fulton County, I would love to meet with the people of Fulton County.
I will meet with everyone willing to meet.
I'll meet.
All right, there it is. We're going to bring back.
We got one more person.
I'm sorry, sister. Oh, hey, how you doing? That's one of my loyal listeners.
Yes, greetings everyone. Well, the definition of affluenza is the inability to understand the consequences of one's actions because of financial privilege. Well, I'm from Southwest Atlanta, where I pay taxes, and I'm a teacher. And it's proven that we're finding that the brain, they said 21, but it's not maturing now to 25. Southwest Atlanta, we're not affluent, but our kids are being punished. And I heard someone said an accountability court. Well, I wish I could find an accountability court for school, but we can't keep punishing the kids for what the parents don't do. So my question is, how are we going to help our scholars our babies that desire, because they don't have the finances. Some of them don't have the education. What are we gonna do? And how many of you would be willing to go to the school? Because a child cannot be what a child cannot see. And our babies are seeing the slingers and the swingers, but they're not seeing you.
Oh, they're
Please
seeing
help
it.
me.
Since I've been doing this, I've gone to, but part of my job as deputy chief over domestic violence and sexual assault is we have programs with the schools in DeKalb County. We do a DUI program with the schools in DeKalb County. We actually put on a jury, we go to the cafeteria, we put on a jury trial, somebody plays the judge, we let one of the students be the prosecutor, let one of the students be the defense attorney. We actually put that on for the school. So yes, I would be there, I'd love to be there. I mean, last week I was at Carver High School speaking to the students. Protecting our youth and working with our youth is why I started doing what I do. So yes, I'll be there. You tell me where to be and I'm gonna show up.
I'll go.
Yeah.
The harsh reality is the judges are at the end of a long train ride. The best way to prevent our youth from getting on the train is to keep them off the train. We can do our part to do that through schools, and when I'm elected, I want you to call me and I'll come to your school, certainly. But we really need to do whatever we can as individuals in our community to keep them off the train. The judicial process in and of itself is not a social process designed to exculpate children from the ills of our community, but as judges, we can do our individual parts to make sure that our children are thriving to the extent that they can in our community.
All right, it's getting late. We'll have that as the last question.
Yes, good evening. Glad you all are taking questions and concerns from the citizens. I read in the paper or saw on TV a couple of weeks ago about the politicizing of the court and where the council person, not council, state person resigned from that committee. I would like to know, I think we had comments on that already, the question was asked earlier, but how as a citizen or a person who sees that there are contracts, whereas most of it is not criminal, where do citizens feel comfortable in seeing something that goes against the public good as far as financing or funding or fraud? How do you think that you can best address illegal elected officials or policies that affect the welfare or the public good or public property? Example, public education, parks, developments that citizens raise issues to. How do you fairly address those issues, or you just be quiet?
Well, as a judge, you will be given a caseload both for civil and criminal cases. And so the reality is that those are the things that you will have jurisdiction over. But I do believe that it is important for each judge to be engaged in his or her community, but also have relationships with all of the elected officials within their communities to create a dialogue to ensure that the integrity of the system is maintained and that everybody is actually doing their part. But as a sitting judge, the reality is that you only preside over the cases that come before you. If a case such as that comes before me, if fortunate to be elected, I will ensure that there is a fair process and that the process is one with integrity.